is with new awareness that we turn to our speaker, Andy Stepanian. Andy Stepanian is an animal activist previously engaged in a campaign to shut down the animal testing laboratory, Huntington Life Sciences. Along with 5 other activists and an organization known together as the Shack 7, Andy Stepanian was charged and prosecuted for his animal advocacy work under a law that later became the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. He was sentenced to 26 months and jailed in a secretive prison known as a Communication Management Unit. He currently works as a publicist in New York City. It is currently an honor to share in this presentation on his experience.
If someone grows up within a system that constantly rewards bad behavior, they may have some sort of moral balance. But eventually, if it comes down to earning enough money, they're going to start making choices that aren't the best moral choices. Choices like to test on animals. Choices like to lower the age of the workers in your shop. Choices like cutting back on their pay or cutting back on their ability to unionize or whatever it may be. This doesn't just affect animals, it affects the environment, it affects you and I, it affects workers, it affects healthcare. I mean, we're hearing about it every day. And so that led to this conclusion. It's not just myself, but it's activists all across the country kind of reached some sort of critical mass where they said, we're tired of sitting outside of a fur shop with a sign making demands, or we're tired of standing outside of Macy's, or we're tired of standing outside of Huntington Life Sciences saying, please change. Because these people have nothing invested in changing. They're not going to change or listen to us, and there is not a dialogue. So what we decided to do, and what I'm accused of doing, is going after the money. Now, the National Rifle Association does the same thing, but in reverse. The National Rifle Association uses money to affect policy, because they have a lot of money. So they run into Congress and they say, we want X, Y, and Z passed the next time, and they try to buy out as many politicians as they can. Well, we're activists. I mean, how many of us are worried about the next meal that we're going to get? Or how many of us are still in college, or worried about college tuition, or a mortgage payment, or any one of these things? The truth is, yes, there's a few national nonprofits that have large budgets, but outside of that, even those national nonprofits only have 2 or 3 lobbyists. The National Rifle Association probably has a lobbyist to mirror every single constituency in America to make sure that they're able to talk to every single one of these people. And so, if we wanted to play that game, it's not possible right now with the resources that we have. And so you farm it in reverse. You reverse engineer it. You go and say, well, if we can't give them money and sway their opinion this way, then we're going to take money away from them. So we can't steal money from CEOs, although some activists, I think, did at some point. You can't really do that. It's not really possible. But what you can do is you could say, your profits are A, B, and C. And we are going to cut back on B and C through various myriad different styles of protest. And some of that is illegal. Some of that is direct action. Some of those things, are perfectly legal. But combined, it was an effort to say that we are not going to allow this laboratory to get the lifeblood that they need to exist. We were viewing it like an organism. We were going to say we're going to choke it out. And that's what the Shack campaign was. And that's what I got indicted for. I got indicted for something really, really trivial and silly. At the end of the whole thing, I know that you guys read the internet and read in the papers all the articles that came out about us. But the truth is, when you get indicted and you ultimately get convicted, it becomes more and more clear towards the end exactly what you did to qualify to violate this law. And so what I did was, it was someday in March, I think, I went into a Deloitte & Touche office, which is an auditing firm, went into the front door, didn't have to break anything, didn't have to damage any property or anything else like that. I hung over a balcony. Well, this is actually after I handed out DVDs or something like that in the cubicles to the workers there. And then I hung over the balcony and I threw a fistful of leaflets so that it rained down on the employees in their cubicles. Not really a big deal. The local cops came and they escorted me and the other people that were there out. But in the context of the Animal Enterprise Protection Act, which is the law that I was charged with violating, they said that that action created in the following day Huntington Life Sciences to not qualify temporarily for a listing on the stock exchange. Now, it's not the normal market that we were used to. There was some other B-tier market. I don't know what it's called anymore. But they didn't meet a certain qualification. And as a result of that, treasury, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon from my action, they lost a lot of profits. And no one could really put a number on that. We asked at sentencing, well, tell us how much it is. We want to know so we can adjust our restitution in accordance to it. We also wanted to know what HLS was doing financially, and they never told us. They said that because they're afraid of other activists targeting them, or they're afraid that we're going to publish the receipts of how much money they're making or not making in the press, we're not going to release it. So we're going to give it a nice clean number of $1 million, because we all can mutually agree that it costs more than $1 million. And we're going to hit you up with $1 million in restitution. So I obviously appealed it. I said, where's the $1 million? Show me $1 million of lost profits. And in the appeal, they came back and they said only one thing, that the aggregate of the actions led to $360 million in damages over the course of 4 years. Now, they're levying that against 6 individuals. How many people are in this room right now? Just think about that for a second. I will not again ever advocate that you go out and you cause an animal enterprise to lose its profits, because I think that's a crime now. But instead, I'm saying this: 6 individuals, far many more. And all that says to us is that if this is about speech, and it's not about direct action, because in the end of it, I'm not charged with direct action. If this is about speech, then the government is very worried about what you think and what you say. So all these paradigms, when we say over and over again that we don't have power, that money has the only power, or what can I possibly do? I'm only one individual. The truth is you could do a heck of a lot. No matter what it is you believe in, you could do a heck of a lot. And the truth is that these companies that are out there that we consider to be our adversaries for their beliefs and their politics actually really care about what you have to say. And that's something that I doubted for most of my life until I read that. I said, wow. And I realized that if I give a talk and I talk about everything that was bad that happened to me, then the people that are potentially in this room or another room or another college could be potentially dissuaded from opening their mouths and speaking about the things they care about, which is what they're trying to stop from happening. This isn't about me. This isn't about my co-defendants. This isn't about Shaq. This isn't even that much about Huntington Life Sciences. This is about the power of individuals in this room and what they could do to slowly ebb the tide of concern and critical mass that people have to industries and institutions of abuse. And that's perspective. So perspective is that they think I'm a terrorist and other individuals think something else, but I'm going to get into something more coming from my observations while incarcerated. And, they knocked down my door, they sent me off to prison, real abridged version of what happened to us. And we went to trial and all this other stuff too. My 3rd week in prison, I was in the hole for the first 3 weeks because I did an interview on Democracy Now! The morning I turned myself in. And because of that, they said that there was a potential threat to my life because I was a target for extortion because the inmates thought I was a celebrity. Now this is the junk they feed me while I'm in the hole. And I said, well, how do I get myself out of it? How do I get legal counsel, et cetera, et cetera? And they tell me that I'm not allowed a phone call, I'm not allowed a pen or paper, and I'm not allowed to receive mail. I'm also not allowed to talk to counsel while I was there because it was a security measure. And at that point I was like, well, how long am I going to be here for? I started to get worried that, okay, yeah, I mentally prepared myself for 3 years out in the yard. I might have to get into a fight or whatever else. I got all that taken care of in my head. I didn't think about 3 years in a box. So I think it was 17th day I was there. I got visited by people from, you would probably know better than I think it was the Center for Constitutional Rights. I think that's who it was. They came to the jail. They had special permission because of their lawyers' badges and whatnot. And they came in demanding to see me. They threatened with a letter of lawsuit to all the individuals that worked on the different floors of the prison, everybody that labeled themselves an official, even if it was just a psychiatrist or whatever it was that worked in that area, or a social worker. They hit them with a piece of paper that said, on their way out, as they slowly got escorted out the place, saying, we're going to sue you unless you release them to general population. Within 24 hours, I was in general population because of the voice and letter of this group. While in general population, they put me in a gang unit. So there were Bloods, there were Latin Kings, and then there were Italian crime, whatever you want to call it. And it was fairly racially subdivided, and they put me in a cell with a Blood. And he didn't want to claim his status as a Blood anymore. Because of that, the other Bloods wanted to run him off the block, and they were going to, scare him away, whatever it is they do. I go to set up my sheets over the bed and whatnot, and I find a knife underneath my mattress. And I automatically thought that this is the bad situation to get myself in, because what do? Do I throw out the man's knife? Do I throw it in the toilet? Because then he's going to get mad because that's what he's using to defend himself, et cetera, et cetera. So when he finally comes back to the cell and I introduce myself to him, I say, I want to get rid of this thing. You have to live with me now. What's going on? And he tells me about his history. He tells me that he got in trouble for a drug charge when he was 16 years old, and now he's 28 years old. That his cousins got in trouble, and he was subpoenaed to a grand jury, and he didn't know what to do. So he talked a little bit about other people, but didn't talk about his cousin for fear his cousin would get in trouble. And he found himself indicted on a robbery conspiracy charge. Because he had a prior felony, he was facing 35 years in prison, and they were trying to convince him to take a plea bargain. His name was Darren Rucker. And Darren Rucker and I became friends over the course of a couple of weeks. And I saw this man that, in all fairness, he was kind of tough. In all fairness, most people might find him intimidating at first glance. I saw him just open up. I got my first visit. It was from my mother. She came to MDC Brooklyn. I saw her. We talked a little bit. He was called down simultaneously with me, and it was the mother of his child and his baby girl that was just born while he was incarcerated. He came back up that night. We talked about our visit. I asked him how it went. He said it was great to see his family. And I saw this man that was this pinnacle of what the world describes as tough, what the world describes as hard, just break apart. He started punching the locker that was in our cell. He started crying like a baby. And I held him as he talked about his kid. And I just listened. There was nothing that I could do to correct this situation. Who am I? I'm like a middle-class white kid from the suburbs who, my family's intact. I'm an animal rights activist. I pretty much do what I want. I might shoplift food. Fuck. What do you say to this person? So I just held him and I listened. And he cried and talked about his daughter. And he said he made himself a promise never to do what his father did to him. And it turns out that his father wasn't there because his father was locked up. And this is not the reality of just Darren. This is the reality of, I don't know how many people. Countless people. Disproportionately, racially disproportionate in this country, that people from lower incomes are facing the same paradigm. Why? Because their neighborhoods are economically deprived. Why are they economically deprived? Because our socioeconomic system states that we need to have workers that do things like our janitors and whatnot, and other people that are CEOs. And there's this disparity in between, and they always have to make sure that certain school districts get less money, or certain school districts get more money to make sure that there are people to fill the remedial jobs and other people to fill these high-up jobs. And so there was this example of capitalism, and while I was holding him, and he finally fell asleep while crying, I got to writing. And that was the first chunk of writing I did on my book, which I guess will never come out. All my friends yell at me about that. But it was dedicated to Darren. And I sat, and my window faced west, kind of facing the East River. Kind of facing the East River. It wasn't quite that way, but it was close enough. There was a old sugar factory between myself and the river. And I tried to stand up like this so I could see some water in this thin window. And I wrote about what was on the other side of the water. And what was on the other side of the water were laboratories here, and I'm not going to specify which ones, were laboratories here in Manhattan that were conducting maternal deprivation experimentation. And I thought about what they do to primates and how doctors study primates by taking their children away from them and probing and monitoring the psychological effects of what would happen to that primate if they had their children taken away from them. And I almost felt guilty for writing this, like shorthand, just getting it out really quick, because I said, what if he read this? He would be offended that I was making this comparison. But at the same time, what if she, the primate that's here in Manhattan, had a voice that we understood, one that was audible? What would she say about the child that was taken away from her while she sits there in that cage? Would she lash out like Darren did? How far and how different are we between the non-human species of animals and these human species of animals? The truth is the disparity there is actually kind of slim. It may look very different, but the basics, will to survive and love for our young, it's there. We all want to eat. It's there. We all wonder what's out there. And so that's perspective of thinking, what would it be like to be Darren Rucker? And what would it be like to be that primate that's here in a laboratory? And I hope that I didn't offend anyone by saying that, because half my reason for not releasing this is my writings is that I felt that it would offend a lot of people, the comparisons that I made. The next comparison that I'm going to make, in the next lens that I'm going to try to let you see through, is of a man called Abu Sayyaf. Abu Sayyaf is accused of being a member of Al-Qaeda. When I was leaving prison, my last 6 months of incarceration were spent in a place called the Communications Management Unit, or CMU. It's a really goofy term for a federal program for political prisoners. And even though the United States will espouse time and time again that they don't hold political prisoners, the CMUs in Marion, in Terre Haute, Indiana, and also the female CMU, which is at the FMC Carswell in Texas, are specifically political prisons. Whether or not those people were cooperators or if they still stay true to the movements that they believe in, every single person in that populace stood for something politically, and they went to jail for it. So whether or not you were fighting in Cuba, or if you were a Puerto Rican freedom fighter, or if you were a member of Al-Qaeda, or if you were one of these Tea Party tax protesters, you're there. And so that's the demographic of the people that are at these prisons. And I've been asked time and time again to talk about these prisons, but not only is it not to my benefit legally to talk about them, but also for the same reasons I already said, I don't want to talk about them, because I know that part of the reason they put me there is that they knew I had a big mouth. They knew I'd come home and start talking about them in hopes that I'd scare other people. Oh, I don't want to do this because I might end up at a CMU. I might not ever be able to see my loved ones again. Or if I do, it's going to be for 1 hour every 2 months behind glass through a telephone. So when I was there, there was only 4 other non-Muslims that were there. The rest of them were largely Arab nationals. One man was a Palestinian native, grew up in Lebanon. His name, we knew him as Abu Sayyaf. The media knows him as Adam Hassoun. The co-defendant to Jose Padilla and Dr. Jayusi in Florida. I'm not going to get into what his charges were or why he was there. I really can't, and it's a shame. But this man was the kindest, most loving, most gentle, brilliant man I ever met in my entire life. Abu Sayyaf knew that I had this massive amount of restitution. He knew that because I owed more than $1 million to Huntington Life Sciences, that they garnished not only my pay or any money I'd have in the outside world or the Honda Civic that was in my driveway, they'd also take money that I'd earned while in prison. So you're required to work while in prison under some law, otherwise you go to the hole. So I worked there making like, I don't know, 45 cents an hour or something like that. And then of that, I had to give 55% of the 45 cents I made an hour to Huntington Life Sciences. So it's either spend time in the hole or work, and this is true of all of us that had the restitutions, that we worked, and a portion of our money was going into what was called the Financial Responsibility Program. And I had to go to these things that were like AA meetings telling me how to manage my assets and finances when I get home in order to keep up with my restitution, because if I don't, I'll violate and go back to prison. And I was like, wow, really? Financial Responsibility Program, slang FRP. So because I was hit with the big bad FRP, I couldn't get some of the amenities from commissary that I would like, because I knew if I bought too much, like a compounding mortgage, they'd also start taking more from me. So I could never tell my family, put some money in my books, because if you put money in my books past $200, they're now going to increase it from 55% to 78%. And I don't want that, because of that 78% equals 5 bags of rice and 5 bags of beans that I'm going to put in boiling water over the course of 30 days and eat. So I was like, I got to do this math. So I was doing math with food to make sure that I'd get enough vegan food while at the CMU. And he asked me one day what I was doing. And I was being ostracized at the CMU by choice, because I'm like, okay, here's all this Al-Qaeda, and then you got Mr. Rogers. And I'm like, they wanted to play basketball, I could barely play basketball, and I'm like, what do I do? Sit over here. And the polite nod and things like that for a little while, because I didn't know what to do. I was like, who am I? Like, what? This is nuts. And he asked me what I was doing, and he wanted to give me food. And because I was at what they call a wide open compound beforehand, I was generally like imprinted to think, don't take anything from anyone, because then I'll owe it back with interest or something else like that. Like if I borrow 1 bag of rice, I'm going to have to pay 2 bags of rice back to the blood on D Block, because he wants 2 bags of rice for every 1 bag of rice he gives me this week. I'm not going to do that. So I was like, oh, no, I'm good. I don't need to take anything. I don't need to take anything. And he went around to all the other Muslim brothers, and he started collecting food that was vegan, and they were all reading the ingredients and bringing it to me and leaving it at the front of my cell. Not asked for, right? So I didn't know what to do, and obviously this led to conversation. And he said, in a couple of years, my first son, he's going to be about your age. He's at the university in Beirut right now. He starts talking to me about his kids. I start talking to him about his appeal. I start learning more and more about it. We eventually swap our pre-sentencing agreements to see who's cooperating and who isn't. And I look at his thing and I say, dear Lord. Because I was home on house arrest watching television when he got arrested, and it was on every single channel. I'm like, what I am reading right here is totally different than what the TV said. No one knew that he was government intelligence. No one knew that he refused to work on a certain program, and that because of that he became a liability. No one knew that Jose Padilla was military intelligence and worked for the military and was in the Marines when he got arrested. They knew him as the dirty bomber. There was no dirty bomb. There was none of that. And you know what the sad part was? I believed that. So when I got there, I'm like, well, I'm not racist. I'm not going to judge these people, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a fucking dirty bomber. I'm just going to walk over here now. And I'm like, well, who am I to judge? And I think what really hit home for me was during the Republican National Convention. I was sleeping late. It was like 11 o'clock. For the first time doing that in prison, because at the medium security prison, you couldn't do that. You had to get up like at dawn when the doors open because you don't want someone to stab you in your sleep or whatever else like that. There was none of that. The CMU was calm, quiet. Everyone was polite to each other. Some singing, some praying. There was none of that. It was almost like a vacation away from prison, but you're still in prison. And I wake up to hear, Andy, get over here, get over here, get over here. Are these your friends? And it's CNN, and there's people smashing the windows of banks and whatnot. And I'm like, no, those aren't my friends, Abu Sayyaf. He's like, well, but they look like you, though. They're wearing you have those pictures of you and your friends back home with the bandanas and the tight pants. They look like you. I was like, no, it's different. And all the while, as activists we're taught, security culture and whatnot, I'm looking at them like, whew. I was like, these guys got none of that, which may be half the reason why they're here. I don't know. But I looked at him, and they panned to a scene real quick of a woman who was in her mid-70s, standing at the front of a protest line, just giving 2 peace signs, refusing to back down. And she was being pepper sprayed. And she wouldn't take a step backwards. Instead, she just did this. And all the Muslims gathered around, and they were looking, and everybody was silent. And Abu Sayyaf started crying. And I'm like, why are you crying? And he said to me, if every American was like this woman, there would never be any of the problems that we have right now.